This is the first tutorial in a series on the granular modules in Reaktor, and the granular modules cause a lot of confusion for a number of reasons, one of which is, of course, that granular synthesis itself is not very well understood by a lot of people, and also they tend to have a large number of inputs that are kind of confusing, and they don't necessarily have a simple default way to be wired up, which is also pretty confusing for a lot of people. So in this particular video, I'm going to be using the grain cloud delay to build an effect that is inspired by a few of the effects on the Korg Chaos Pad 3. They're the grain effects if you have the KP3. So let's get started. So the first thing I'm going to do is hook up our audio input to the input of the grain cloud delay. And one thing that I found pretty irritating about this module in particular is that we have only a single audio input, and then we have both the left and the right audio outputs, which just makes it kind of a little weird to make stereo effects with. I think it would be nice if they had just a left and a right input. So what I'm going to do is set the panning to -1, and that's just going to ensure that our sound is all going to be routed to the left output. And then I'm just going to use a single output for this macro, and then we can duplicate this macro for the right channel if we so choose. Okay, so the effect that I want to emulate today takes a quick sample or grain of audio and plays it back a set number of times, and then grabs another grain of audio and plays that back a set number of times ad infinitum. So to do this, I'm going to use the grain trigger output of the cloud delay module in conjunction with an accumulator. So we're going to set the accumulator to be equal to 0 on a new gate or note press, and then the gate grain trigger itself will output a value of 1 every time a new sample or grain starts from the cloud delay. So for every value of 1 that we receive, the accumulator goes up by 1, so the output is giving us the number of grains that have been created since we've last pressed a MIDI key. So we're going to divide that by a value that's going to be our repeat value, and use the remainder output of the modulo to multiply against the gate. So anytime the output of the gate and the output of the remainder is greater than 0, then we'll feed that value into the freeze, and anytime either one of those values is equal to 0, then the freeze will not be triggered. So this effect will only work when the MIDI gate is on, which is good because it's a pretty glitchy effect, and it's not necessarily something you want to leave on all the time. And whenever the number of grains is equally divisible by the repeat value, then the freeze input will also be equal to 0, which allows you to grab a new grain and start the process over again. Alright, so the next thing I want to do is create a delay length for the length of the grains that we're going to be taking. And we can use this value to control actually several of the inputs. So it's going to control the delay time of the overall effect. It's also going to control the length of the grains, and it'll also control the distance between the grains, which means we're not going to have any overlap between our audio grains. We're just going to take one sample, and when we're done with that one, we're going to take another sample of the same length. And just to explain what I mean really quick by overlap, it's possible to have several different grains playing at the same time, and in fact you can set the maximum number of grains in the properties. I think the default is equal to 32, so the distance between grains can actually be 32 times smaller than the grain length itself. And that comes in really useful when you want to do good pitch shift effects and stuff, and we'll get into using overlap in a little bit later on in a tutorial a little further down the line. So because of this concept of overlap, our grains actually have attack and decay values as well, which you can set with the attack and decay inputs to the grain delay. And what these values do is fade the grains in and out so that you don't get a glitchy sound at the start of a new grain. And by default, the attack value is equal to 0.2, and they have values between 0 and 1. I haven't been able to verify this via the manual, which is pretty vague, but I'm pretty sure that the value from 0 to 1 is then scaled to the length of the overall grain length. So if you have a grain length of 70 milliseconds and you set the attack to 1, then the entire 70 milliseconds will be a ramping up in amplitude. So for now I've just set them both to 0, and we'll see in a little bit why that might not be the best idea. Alright, so we're getting a lot of glitches with the in between the grains there, and that means that we probably don't want the attack and decay times to be equal to 0, at least when the effect is on. However, when the effect is off, we actually do want it to be equal to 0 because there's no overlap between the grains, and it'll also kind of create a bad sound if we have the attack and decay values too high with no overlap. So what I'm going to do is use a gate to control a couple of different things. And I'm going to start by using it to control the direction of our grains. They can either go forward or in reverse. And of course I've been designing this effect to be off when the gate is off, so I'm going to set it up so that it always plays forward when the gate is off. So we're going to use a selector module that, in conjunction with a gate and a compare, will give us a value of 1 for the direction always if the gate is off. And otherwise we're going to use this button here, which I'll rename reverse. And you can see by default it actually has a value of -1 when it's on and a value of 1 when it's off, so that'll perfectly describe its function. And we send this value that controls the direction of our grains into the D/F input. And that will give us a nice reverse effect if we want to have our grains playing in reverse. So let's just verify that that works, and then we'll go on to fix the problems I mentioned with the attack and decay inputs. Okay, so that worked just fine, and now all we need to do is multiply the output of our compare module with the gate by a value that we want to set the attack and decay to whenever the gate is on. And that way, whenever the gate is off, it'll just multiply the value by 0, no harm, no foul. Whenever it's on, it'll multiply it by 1. So I'm just going to set this to 0.01. This is going to give us a quick fade in and fade out between our grains, which will save us a lot of grainy, glitchy sounds that we don't want to hear.